Today's big show is on causation and science. Scientists assume that an event occurs for a reason. Everything has a reason. Events occur in predictable, non-random ways. One event leads to another. There is also this, especially in sociology, this idea of multiple causation, where because social events are so complex, several factors working in combination may cause them. And to give you an example of that, I want to talk to you a little bit about the multifactorial nature of things. This is multiple causation. I'm going to give you a historical example. We're going to talk about the genocide in Bangladesh in 1971. In 1971, Pakistan killed somewhere between 300,000 and 3 million, we don't really know the exact number, of Bengali people. Pakistan controlled Bangladesh in 1970. It was called, Bangladesh at the time was called East Pakistan. The Pakistan Army had efforts to curb the Bengali national movements. The Bengali wanted to be independent. Pakistan didn't want them to be independent. Now, at the time of this genocide, this was like at the height of the Cold War. That's the time period between the United States and the Soviet Union and their fighting between communist and non-communist countries. In 1963, there was a formal split between Russia, the USSR, and communist China. And President Lyndon Johnson started the process at the same time of giving military aid to the Pakistani. We were giving military aid to anyone who would be our friend and not be a communist country. When General Yahya Khan took over Pakistan, he decided it was very important to claim and keep what became known as Bangladesh or East Pakistan. He said to kill 3 million of them and the rest will eat out of our hands. Well, when he started this genocide, Congress cuts off all military aid to Pakistan. They did not want to be supplying weapons to a country that was using those weapons to kill innocent people. However, Yahya Khan and Richard Nixon, President of the United States at that time, had a close personal relationship. And Yahya Khan volunteered himself to work with, because he was friends with the leader of Communist China, he would help Richard Nixon get into and be able to visit China. And when he does this, Nixon continues military aid to Pakistan secretly against the order of Congress. Congress didn't know anything about it. Nixon kept sending weapons directly to Pakistan, who would use those weapons to slaughter innocent Bengali people. And Nixon goes to China in 1972. Not because he really cared that much about China, but he wanted to drive a deeper wedge between Russia and China. And the enemy of my enemy is my friend was Nixon's belief. If China and Russia were fighting, he was going to be friends with China because he really didn't like Russia. The 1971 Bangladesh genocide had lots of reasons to them. Some of them which started 8 to 10 years before the actual event. The multifactorial nature of things. You know, there are two types of variables we're going to be looking at this semester. Quantitative and qualitative variables. Quantitative variables would be a characteristic that can be measured numerically. Height, weight, age, that sort of thing. Qualitative variable would be a characteristic that is defined by its presence or absence in a category, like marital status. An independent variable is a characteristic that causes something to occur. It causes something to occur. The dependent variable is a characteristic that reflects a change. Like in this image here, the independent variable is the water, how much water each plant got, and the dependent variable was that reflected the change was how much the plants grew. An intervening variable would be a variable that changes the relationship between independent and dependent variable. So I like this graphic which shows a cause and effect and then the intervening variable in between. we know that there is a relationship between how much you study and your grades, but intervening variables can be things like COVID and not being able to come to school, things that would impact, that would cause the relationship between the independent and dependent variable to change. A correlation is a measure of the relationship between two variables. A positive correlation was when both the independent variable and the dependent variable change in the same direction. Both go up, both go down. A negative correlation is when the variables change in opposite direction. When one goes up, the other goes down. But it's important for you to know that correlation and causation are not the same thing. Correlation does not imply causation. This is a mistake that people make all of the time. Things can be related, but they don't necessarily cause it. And scientists have 3 standards for showing causation. And this is something that we're going to look at a lot this semester. What really causes these things? There can be many causes to a social event, like we just looked at with the Bangladesh genocide. But we have to be sure that we're not looking at correlations, but causation. So for standards for showing causation, standard 1 would be 2 variables must be correlated. There has to be correlation. Standard 2, all other possible factors must be taken into account. In standard 3, a change in the independent variable must occur before a change in the dependent variable can occur. What that really is saying is this: the effect cannot happen before the cause. And there's also something that's known as a spurious correlation, a relationship between 2 variables that is actually caused by a third factor. This is an idea that you see correlation, but it's not really, there's no causation. And I have a couple examples to show you what we're talking about here. Let's first talk about, here is a spurious correlation. The number of people who drowned by falling into a pool, swimming pool, terrible tragedy, and films made by Nicolas Cage. You'll notice that there's a very strong correlation with they change at about the same rate all year by year. The more films Nicolas Cage makes, the more people who drown in swimming pools. But Nicolas Cage movies, as bad as they might be, are not causing people to drown in swimming pools. There's not a causation, there's a correlation. In this case, it's a spurious correlation. And here's another example. People who drowned after falling out of a fishing boat and marriage rate in Kentucky. And this shows that as fewer people got married in Kentucky, fewer people drowned. This is a spurious correlation. The marriages aren't causing the drownings, or vice versa, the drownings aren't causing marriages. This is a spurious correlation. That's our big show for today.